Welcome to the Resilience Road podcast brought to you by AdVenture Media. My name is Jess Larson. I'm going to be co-hosting this episode because we thought it'd be fun for the rest of you to get to know the real host, Isaac Rudansky, a lot better. So Isaac Rudansky, CEO of AdVenture Media, why don't you jump in here, tell us where you guys are located, how you find your clients, and really how you started this business.
So AdVenture Media is a digital advertising agency headquartered in New York with an office in South Florida and an office in Philly. We got started back in 2013, and to date, we've really never made an outbound sales call. And I'll get back to that in a moment as to the why. All of our clients have found us through content that we've produced, and we've always been a content first, educational first agency. The content came about because the first sort of iteration into the business was I was trying to make a career as an artist. I was painting sort of impressionist paintings and selling them at art festivals in Long Island, Montauk, West Hampton, different art galleries, mainly throughout the summer. And I came home one night. It rained on the way home. I had all the paintings bungeed to the roof of a car that I had to borrow. I had all the panels for the tent inside the car, and paintings were all ruined. I dragged myself up into this apartment. It was a 500 square foot apartment. Maybe I was living with my wife at the time. And I said, this is ridiculous. I can't keep lugging these paintings around to make a few $100. And I was selling and it was fine. I don't think it was really enough money to live on. I need to have a website. And I was not a tech savvy kid. So to me, a website was how am I going to have a website? I don't have money to make a website. Hire who am I going to hire? Google? I have to hire really expensive developers. A couple of days later, I heard an ad on the radio for a company called Squarespace. Now, back in 2013, Squarespace was not as big. They were still advertising on the radio. That was their main in with consumers. And the ad said, anybody can make a website. I was that is not true. There's no way that's true. Typical advertising. But I heard another ad the next day. I sat down, went to squarespace.com in a recliner in my living room, which also doubled as a dining room, which also doubled as a foyer, which also doubled as an office. And I think I stayed in that chair for 20 hours, and I made a website with a checkout, with a functioning e-commerce checkout, with zoom in on my pictures. It was really, I would say, over the last decade, one of the most exhilarating experiences that I could possibly remember. And then, of course, the question became, how do I get people who are not my mother and sister to visit this website? How do I get my paintings in front of people who want to buy art? That question led me down the wormhole of internet advertising. I discovered that Google was an advertising company. I learned about advertising on social platforms. And I was obsessed with it. I was in a master's degree for industrial organizational psychology at Hofstra University at the time, but I became completely obsessive. Just something about performance advertising where it was immediate. You could pay to play, but to be profitable required a really strong blend of creativity and science. So I created campaigns. I was sending traffic to my website for my paintings, selling a very little bit. It could be the paintings weren't very good. I don't think they were, but I was really into teaching what I learned about digital advertising. Although I had only just learned about it a week before, I had made another website on Squarespace selling training services for, it was $49. That business failed. I couldn't get anyone who wanted me to teach them. So I switched the premise to an agency model where I said, I will do it for you. And that's how we started. There's a lot of stories along the way. But I always had education in the back of my mind. I released a YouTube video, a 1.5 hour long training module on Google AdWords. It was called AdWords back at the time. Now it's called Google Ads. And I walked people through the creation of a campaign. And there were hundreds, if not thousands, of other AdWords tutorials on YouTube. I just made sure that mine was simple. It was clear. It was step by step. It broke down the components. It gave examples. It showed the formulas, really how to do it. And that video took off. I think it has around 1 million views now. But people were calling us, and I wasn't promoting the agency. At the very beginning, this video is still on YouTube. My wife reads the like opening card, and she says, "Oh, like just to make us sound like we have more than one employee. If you have any questions, you can reach out. Here's our phone number. Here's our website." And we were getting clients calling us with credit card in hand, saying, "We'll hire you to do our campaigns, to manage our campaigns." And we were charging very little, but we were signing business, and it's invaluable to sign business, even if the business isn't that valuable, because that provides the education of how to handle clients, how to set up business systems. We eventually had to hire employees. So there's a lot more to the courses and additional courses that we've released and additional content that we've released over the years. But for the last 7-8 years, we have clients, some of our clients include NASDAQ, Sports Illustrated, Hearst, Forbes Magazine, M. Shank and Communications, Agility, Hanes, Global Trans, Sports Illustrated, I didn't mention that, Corning Glass. Yeah, Corning Glass. Like, so these are like legitimate businesses, Assurian. We've pitched and we're very close in the finalist agencies with AstraZeneca, with LexisNexis, Doc Martens. And we have, and all of these businesses found out about us through these courses that I created, converting a little living room into a studio with a whiteboard painted on the wall. I lined the entire ceiling of the apartment with silver foil because you could not face a softbox light at a whiteboard because of the glare. So I got these like $50 softbox lights on Amazon. I had to put them all up directly at the ceiling, line the entire ceiling with silver foil so it bounced the light back down on the. I had to learn how to record. I had to learn how to edit. I had to learn how to use software. It was a massive undertaking. But 6 years later, when NASDAQ calls and says, "I took your course 5 years ago and I just got a job at NASDAQ and we're looking for a new agency. I want to ask you if you want to throw your hat in the ring." It's a very encouraging feeling. So here we are. We're about 50 people across these 3 offices. We're hoping to continue to grow. Obviously, there's ups and downs in the business. It's hard, but I'm very fortunate to do what I do. I love it. And most specifically, I love the people I work with. Like, I feel like I could be in plumbing. I could be a mechanic. And if I had the same team, I think I'd be very happy.
So, what do you think you guys have done for total ad spend on behalf of your clients? Like, how many tens of millions of dollars do you think it is?
It's probably hundreds of millions over the course of the year, over the course of the last 8-9 years. Yeah. I would say on an annual basis, we're probably managing somewhere between $50 and $80 million. $100 million, probably around the $100 million mark per year in advertising.
So, I'm thinking about things like, things that some of your clients have said, like, "Hey, they took our return on ad spend from 1.4 to 3.4, right?" And there's a lot of people that think that can be done at a small scale, but they get really skeptical that you can do that with tens of millions of dollars, like that you can do that with larger programs. Can we do 2 things? Can you define people what ROAS really is as their understanding metric like this? And then can you talk about maybe what you guys do different to be able to achieve that where so many other folks can't?
Sure. Okay, ROAS. ROAS is a very commonly used metric. Some people call it ROAS, some people call it ROAS. It's an acronym for return on ad spend. And if you're familiar with ROI, return on investment, it's essentially the same thing. But ROI is more complex because it could account for overhead, it could account for other investments. Whereas ROAS is a return metric, it's a profitability metric specifically for ad spend. So it's your total conversion value divided by your cost of advertising. That's it. Simple. Gives you ROAS. So if you generated $10 in sales, right? So it's not a measure of It's not necessarily a measure of profitability, although it can be. I'll get to that in a second. But let's say you did $10 of gross sales and you spent $5 in advertising. You'd have what we call a 2x ROAS. 10 divided by 5 is 2, right? 2x ROAS, a 200% ROAS. Now, that's not objectively good or bad, right? It depends on what your margins are on those $10 of sales. So if you're running at a 10% margin and you've earned $1 in profit and you spend $5 to generate that $1 in profit, you're in trouble, right? That's a losing proposition. So what we'll do oftentimes with clients is we'll determine break-even thresholds of ROAS. So based on your margins, based on your cost of goods sold, based on your shipping, based on your returns, and then you add some complexities based on your lifetime value. Let's say you're selling a subscription product. Let's say you're an e-commerce company and customers come back or they buy accessories. Well, how do you measure that? How do you know? Well, it's not so easy. It's not so simple to understand lifetime value because most of your customers haven't lived out their life by you yet. If you're Starbucks and you have like 50 years of an extraordinary amount of data, you could probably get a decently good prediction of lifetime value when one person walks into this location and buys a grande frappuccino. You might have a sense of lifetime value, but most businesses, it's very hard. So you model it out. What if on average, every one customer refers 0.2 people to your website or brand by word of mouth? Well, how do you incorporate that into your formula and how do you get to that 0.2 number? So there's all different ways of looking at data and adding this complexity, but then we'll basically get a sense of what is your margin. When you earn $10 of sales, how much money can we expect for you to pocket, the business to pocket at the end of the day? Is it 11, 20, 100, or maybe it's 90 cents? And once we understand margin, then we could say, what is your break-even ROAS? Do you need a 10x return for every dollar spent? Do you need a 1-to-1 return? Or maybe you need a 0.5 return. Maybe you can lose money on the first sale. Maybe you could spend $15 to get those $10 in sales because we know within the next 6 months or within the next 3 months, we are statistically confident that you'll have earned that back and have turned a profit on acquiring that customer. Okay, so now this leads me into the second question. Where I think most clients and businesses fail spectacularly in performance marketing, and this is across the spectrum of spend, whether you're spending $20 a day or $200,000 a day on online advertising, is being too dogmatic about linear short-term profitability. I'm always, or I've had this conversation with clients hundreds of times where they say, we let's go back to our example. We make $10, right? Our margins, let's just call it, our margins are 50%. We have to have a minimum 2 times return every day, right? Otherwise we're not profitable. And then I'll say, look, I see your data. We've analyzed it. You get an average of 4 additional purchases over the course of the year. They're like, oh yeah, but no, it's not profitable if we don't, no, you can't spend more than $5 to get $10 in sales because our margin's 50%. I say, yeah, your margin's 50%, but it's not really 50% on the customer. It's 50% on their first purchase. It's not 50% on the customer. So you're acquiring a customer. We know, and I could tell them the p-value is less than 0.05%. We know they're going to buy 3 more times. And you're not going to have to pay again to get them to buy those next 3 times. So your all-in cost of acquiring the customer was $5. Yeah, today they checked out and they generated $10 in sales. And today you broke even. Or your all-in cost was $10 and you lost $5 on acquiring this customer today. But if we project out over the next 3 to 6 months, you're going to have earned $100 in sales and $95 in profit. And they say, no, like, don't look at it that way. Okay, fine, fair enough. You're a business owner. You're entitled to look at ROAS however you'd like to. But what's the real problem? Why do they fail? Because their competitors are not looking at it this way. There might be a handful of brands who really are let's say, full tilt committed to generating what I call a linear profit, which is, let's say, a 1 to 5 day window where you want to see your campaigns generating that 2x return or that 3x return or that 10x return. if your margins are 10%. But I guarantee you there's at least 10 more sophisticated, more mature businesses that are very happy. They're very happy to look at a more mature lifetime value of a customer. And why is that important? It's important because when they go and bid on Google, and they bid on Facebook, and they bid on Instagram, and TikTok, and Spotify, and podcasts, and programmatic display, and connected TV, and digital out of home, which is all of these markets are basically prescribed by an auction-like environment. There's very little left where I pick up the phone, I call a sales rep at the New York Times, and I go into a negotiation with them about taking over their homepage for a month. It's like, it doesn't really happen anymore. At least in the world that I live in, it's almost all auction centric. The auctions are all different. They all function a little bit differently. Do we charge by CPMs? What dimensions do we include in the auction? But competitors willing to pay more for that customer. The reason they're willing to pay more is because they're willing to take, they're willing to pay a higher acquisition cost today in exchange for longer term profit. Whereas you, i.e. the client that's going to fail, is like, no, this is unsuccessful if we can't turn a profit on a week over week basis. They're like, okay, well, your click costs will not come down because there's 20 other bigger, more mature competitors that want that customer. They're telling Google what they're willing to pay for that customer, and their math is not, it's not like greedy, rich capitalists just throwing money. It's no, they're saying like, we'll pay more because we also have the same we're not necessarily a better business with a better product. We're just happy to earn the profit over a 6-month horizon. So we'll pay more today and we'll knock you out of the auction.
So makes total sense. So let's say somebody gets over that and they realize, oh, like my competitors are calculating that way. I better too if I actually want to be competitive. What is, like let's play a game. I'm a CEO of some big company and we haven't been taking our digital as seriously, and whether it was the pandemic or whatever reason, I'm like, okay, we really have to do this. And I'm saying, Isaac, what are like a couple of the biggest levers that are going to increase my ROAS? We've been doing some of this. It hasn't been that great. What are you guys going to do to increase my return on investment in our ad spend?
So what we would do is look at two pillars, or sort of two tent poles. There's the macro and the micro. Micro, we look at the accounts. We go deep into how accounts are structured. Are you leveraging automation? Just so I could go on. So stop me when I'm going on too much. So just as a quick example, it used to be that you would tell these advertising channels, let's call it Google, Facebook, YouTube, the maximum you're willing to pay for a click on any individual keyword, search, or audience. So you're the CEO and you're running this company, and what are you selling? Maybe you're selling fountain pens, right? So historically, you've understood your margin, you've understood what your pens sell for, and you're looking back historically at your conversion rate. The conversion rate is the percentage of website visitors that turn into customers. And you say, okay, based on my math, when somebody searches for Visconti fountain pen, I'm willing to pay $3. It's the most I'm willing to pay. The problem is that your average is correct. When you take all of your prior customers and margins for your Visconti fountain pens, and you take your historic conversion rate for Visconti fountain pens, you get to $3. That's the maximum for every click, for every visitor. You should not pay more than $3. The problem is that is an average, and averages are always wrong. And if they're right, it's just because it's dumb luck. Some certain individuals, meaning, because let's say you say, okay, my average conversion rate has been 3%, but that's just an average. Conversion rate is binary on an individual basis. I'm going to Google and I'm searching for Visconti fountain pen. I will either convert or I will not convert. If I have a greater predicted conversion rate because I also lease 2 cars, I also watch YouTube videos about stationery, and I'm enrolled in an online calligraphy course. So I have a higher predicted conversion rate than a 17-year-old who has no credit history, doesn't own a car, and is searching for Visconti fountain pen. Maybe he's looking it up for, a research report. Fine. So he has a lower predicted conversion rate. So that when I tell Google my bid is $3 for that keyword, you're treating all individuals searching for that keyword the same. So your bid is either too high for the 17-year-old or it's too low for me, where I have a much higher than 3% predicted conversion rate. That's the whole world of automation, which came on the scene 5 years ago, is giving over to Google the right to set a different bid for every individual in the auction. And a lot of clients don't like that. A lot of clients don't like the black box. A lot of people don't like letting Google choose what an individual pays for a click. To me, it's like, who the hell cares? Who cares what the cost of the click is? What you care is about new customer acquisition, your ROAS, your return, profit margins, scale. But growing up, or people who have been doing this for a while, where everything was about CPC, everything was about CPM, everything was about how do I get the cheapest possible 1,000 impressions? How do I get the cheapest possible click? Have a hard time adopting automation. So that's the first thing. On a micro level, we'll take a look at the structure of the campaign. And then I could give you 100 other things that we would look at across, whether it's TikTok or connected TV or Google or YouTube, right? There's all these different details we want to see. Is it structured according to what we view as best practices? Macro, and I think this is where we distinguish ourselves from other agencies, we get very consultatively involved in how do we maximize revenue from the business. Let's take a look at your website experience. Let's take a look at your product. What are your upsells, your downsells, your cross-sells? If you're a B2B service business, let's take a look and sit on phone calls. Are your salespeople selling? Are there secondary conversion actions we can offer a website visitor if they're not ready for a sales call? Can we develop a white paper? Can we develop thought leadership? Can we develop additional content? Can we put some other elements of the marketing flywheel in place? Not because any of those individual elements will drive a linear profit, but when you have all these different things going and there's a sense of legitimacy about your product and about who you are, then your on-site conversion rate will increase from a bottom of the funnel performance marketing campaign. So that's on the macro level. We do get quite consultatively involved with clients in their business overall, customer satisfaction, helping our clients, let's say, delight, so to speak, their customers, turning customers into evangelists for the product. And even though clients come to us specifically for our reputation in, let's say, performance media buying, most of the relationships transform a little bit into something more brand, UX, retention, and things like that. And if you're at the point where you're spending 10, 15 to $50 million a year on performance marketing, then your micro elements are likely not going to push any needles anymore, right? Now it's more about how do we build this brand? How do we draw customers further into our ecosystem so they spend more money with us and they like us more and they appreciate us more. And we're always happy to have those types of relationships with clients as well. Because look, ultimately in the next 5 years, there'll be very little left to do by humans in any of these channels. Like Google has been moving, let's say Google, which is the biggest, largest, strongest, most profitable ad network on the planet. They're moving aggressively towards more and more automation. And eventually, in my belief, is that there'll be no more keyword targeting. There'll be no more account structuring. There'll be no more shopping feeds. It's going to be, give us a credit card, put in your website URL, and tell us how much you want to spend per day. And that's going to be Google, right? That's not so far off in the future. So then what do you do with agencies? Well, I don't think advertising agencies are going anywhere. I think the sophisticated, consultative, intelligent agencies will always have a place because you still need strategy. Google's never going to be the only place you could advertise. You're still going to need a storefront, whether it's a virtual storefront or it's an augmented reality storefront. Like I'm banking on, I predict that the buying and selling of goods and services is not going anywhere. In which case there's always a good reasonable use of smart people in the middle to help coach that process, which is really how I see agencies.
Well, I want to talk about something else that I think a lot of people don't understand the level you do. Like, it's actually one of my favorite things about getting to do this show is like, I have friends, I have clients who own agencies. And I didn't understand that about ROAS. And I definitely didn't know about the automation. I mean, I just bought Patrick's book on Audible, so I've just
Thank you.
started it. Um, Actually, will you tell people just a quick blurb about the book?
The most important thing you need to know is that I wrote the foreword. So don't skip that part. It's also forwarded by the former global CEO of Young and Rubicam, David Sable. And when he was CEO of Young and Rubicam, it was the largest advertising agency in the world with 188 offices worldwide. But the book is really a masterclass on unlocking profitability from performance, the key performance channels, Instagram, Facebook, Google. I would include YouTube in there as well. It's not overly theoretical. So if you really want an education where coming out of the book, you could sit down and manage campaigns with a high degree of proficiency, then this is the book for you. He is releasing shortly an updated version that is condensed, which we're all excited about, but it was named one of the most important books in advertising in 2021. It was a #1 bestseller in its category on Amazon. We've sold about 10,000 copies to date. It's called Join or Die, Digital Advertising in the Age of Automation. It's available in hardcover, paperback, audiobook, and ebook. It makes a great gift. So go on Amazon and get yourself a copy.
And it's Patrick at AdVenture Media that wrote it. So
Patrick at adventureppc.com. Patrick Gilbert, COO of AdVenture Media, wrote the book. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to get into it just because, the world of possibilities are expanding so much between AI and automation and these things. It seems like it's only going to get more relevant. So I'm excited for it. But what I want to spend kind of our next little bit is about the idea of CEO as thought leader. This idea of like raising your profile, becoming the storyteller in chief, like making it so that when your sales reps are putting your hat in the ring on something, that prospective client's actually heard of you guys or stuff like this. Can you talk about your mindset of CEO as thought leader, because it's obviously turned into millions and millions of dollars for you?
Sure. So I could only give over like sort of what I know and from my own experience, because of course, when you get into Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, it's not so common to see CEOs as thought leaders, right? CEOs are really CEOs. But let's say for us mortals, and aspiring entrepreneurs, small business owners, I cannot overstate how important and how useful I think developing thought leadership and content is and can be for your business. And I was just saying this the other week that I sometimes feel like a one-trick pony, because I get calls all the time from, let's say, whether clients or people within my network who we couldn't take as a client, but they're just asking for advice. They're asking for advice. Okay, what am I doing? I cannot go and take out $100,000 ads in the Wall Street Journal. I cannot go in and spend $50,000 a month and compete with these big advertisers, because there's another fallacy, which we could talk about sometime, that Google has leveled the playing field and it's an equal playing field. It is not an equal playing field at all. That was, okay, let's just put that aside. Right? So I just find myself telling people the same advice. I say, make a course, write a book, start a blog, start a Facebook group, start a question and answer, start a podcast, make a webinar, teach. So I'm thinking to myself, like, will I have upgraded advice for people? Now, I don't feel guilty about giving out this advice, because everything I've mentioned are things that I've done personally, invested a huge amount of time in personally, and have seen the success of personally. However, I guess sometimes I feel like I'm just getting dry and boring. But I'll tell you a story. I went to ChatGPT, because everyone's playing around with ChatGPT now. And I told ChatGPT the following. I said, I'm going to be your human counterpart. Okay? You're going to call all the shots. You are going to make every decision. And I will listen to everything you say as long as it's legal. I said, you have $5,000. I'm giving you $5,000. And I want you to do the best you possibly can to double that amount of money in 2 months. And then every 3 months after that, doubling the money again. And I said, are you up for it? And it said, yeah. I said, okay, what's the first thing I should do to double the $5,000? And then ChatGPT said, oh, like as a language model, I can't give you financial advice. I said, what are you talking about? You just told me you're in. And then it said, okay, you're right. Yeah. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. It said, we're going to create a course. We're going to create a training course on technical market analysis. We're going to teach people how to day trade. And start giving me a course outline, and then said, you're going to upload it to Kajabi. You're going to go to Udemy. And I was like trapped in like the Twilight Zone, because here's the greatest revolution since the internet that no one could stop talking about. ChatGPT, it's everywhere, right? It's like this monumental moment in time. And it's telling me to do the same thing I did as a piss poor newlywed without a window, without a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. Exactly what I did with the only cash I had left in my bank account, which is to buy recording equipment and create an online course. But look, like it's hard, and it's hard to create. It's like everyone wants to be a thought leader, and I think people want to create the content. But what I don't think people realize is that, or maybe people do realize, which is why so few people do it, is that it's very hard. It's time consuming. It's draining, because you actually have to write. You actually have to sit in front of the camera. You actually have to go and upload your videos. You actually have to edit them. You have to post about them. And you have to be willing to live in this thankless universe for a considerably long period of time, and keep doing it with the level of optimism as if it was successful on day one. So it takes somebody nearly insane, or on the cusp of insanity, to do all that. But if I say the same thing, like it has brought in our cost of customer acquisition at our agency is zero. And when we tell investors and people we're speaking to that that's the case, they do not believe it. And I say, you're right, it's not true. We get paid. We earn money to acquire a customer, to acquire a lead, because they're paying us a few bucks to buy our course or to watch our webinar or to buy a book. Like, this stuff generates business. And I will say one more thing. You can get so much mileage out of substantial content. So I like to encourage people to like think through like the tent poles, right? So there's, I would say, full length courses, a podcast, a book. Okay, let's just say those are the tent poles. From those three, if you're creating that type of content, which is substantial content, you could have a blog, you could have a vlog, you could have shorts, you could have static posts, you could have carousels, you could have transcripts, right? Like, you could get a lot of mileage. You could have individual YouTube clips on your YouTube channel pulled from your course. You could have a freemium version now. You could have a Facebook group. You could have a subscription. So there's a lot of interesting things you could do if you put the effort and time and investment into creating some very substantial tentpole pillar content. So I fully advocate for it. I've given that advice to friends and family ad nauseum. I've helped anyone willing to do it. I've helped as much as I can. And it's never a bad idea. It's nothing. You cannot possibly be harmed by committing yourself to creating substantial content, and to generating a following. There's a Jess. Are you familiar with this idea? I forgot who wrote the blog post. Super fans.
It was Pat Flynn. Yeah, we had him on the show.
Okay. Yeah, there you go, Pat Flynn. Yeah. So I was sort of into this by the time I stumbled upon his content, which is phenomenal. But his idea is that, like, you probably could say his idea over better than I can, but it's like, you don't need that many super fans to really have a business through thought leadership. Because the super fans, like, I'll give you an example. I have a Facebook group of 60,000, let's say 60,000 pretty active members, and I've sold 290,000 copies of my course. Those are all, I would say they're all fans. Not all of them, right? 10% really hate me. So so the rest of them are fans. But there's a percentage that are super fans. So if I put out a middle grade children's novel that is the furthest thing that any of these people would ever buy, they will buy it. They will buy it because it's me. Like, that's the super fan. But so there's really I'm very pleased and I'm very happy and I feel very fortunate that I put the time and I had that ridiculous degree of optimism when I was filming these 30-hour courses and pushing myself to write this type of content. I had no idea how it would play out, and it failed miserably and spectacularly and completely for a long time. But I kept at it. Like, I just kept trying different variations. I just kept trying different things.
What's funny, like I can't agree with you more. Like, when I was starting the podcast, it was what we could self-fund. Do you know what I mean? And how we could do it and
Right.
what equipment we could buy. We're learning editing, whatever. And then over time, I was able to bring on staff to do it all for me, right? And like, I look at these things of like, there's certain elements that are just painful and hard because I can't afford to, have a $200,000 an episode TV show made about me or something, right? But then there's other things like book writing where like I fully plan on paying editors. I don't plan to learn enough about writing. Like, I think it's my job to have unique insight because I've interviewed all these billionaires and stuff off the show, like to be able to have tied dots together that other people haven't tied. And then I plan on hiring an editor to make it
Yes.
sound like a book instead of sound like just talking, right? And so like
Yes.
there's this decision tree of like, do you have more time than money? And for certain things, I definitely have more time than money. And then for other things, I've got more money than time to learn how to be a good editor. Because to me, I think that's probably a many year process, just knowing my skill set, right?
Yeah.
And I think as you were talking, I mean, it sounded just like entrepreneurship. It sounded just like the pro athletes that we've had on the show, whether NBA or NFL, NHL, where they they worked for years and years and years, paying to practice as an athlete or burning investor dollars to try and get their product built. And they just have to have faith in spite of it's not working. Oh, we just found out it's not working again. Oh, we just found out it's not working again. Oh, nobody will buy it. Do you mean like,
Yeah.
and it is like, to me, it's just one more piece of evidence of the triumph of long-term thinking. And by all means, if I have the money, I'm going to try and shorten that as much as possible by bringing on as many experts as possible. But I mean, what awesome thing in life doesn't take stick-to-itness and effort and dealing with rejection?
Nothing. I really don't think there's anything. And if there is, I'd love to experience it one day. And to your point, like, if let's say, talking about book writing for a second. So I'm in a similar position. You're like, we could choose between taking a stab at writing and learning writing, or, we could put an outline together, do an interview with editors, and we could pay an editor to write the book. It's an amazing position to already be in. Now, to your earlier point, like, you have a lot of people who are not in the position to pay an editor, because let's face it, to pay an editor of the sort that you're going to want to work with, or that I would want to work with, is going to be a $25,000+ ordeal, $30,000 ordeal to like really put a book together. And then
between
there's
ghostwriters, developmental editor, copy editor, like there's a few folks involved, right?
100%. I'm going through a similar process now with a fiction project that's been a very long time project, and took a lot of stick-to-itiveness and ups and downs and interesting stories. But hold that aside, the counterpoint to that is my first course, where I had no money at all. I bought the cheapest possible equipment. I didn't have it was like a $25 lavalier mic that went straight into your iPhone. And if you speak to anyone in recording, it's like, that's not how to record audio. You need a preamp, and you get, okay, fine. I didn't know how to edit. So I bought Final Cut Pro. I probably pirated Final Cut Pro, for really being honest. And I learned how to use Final Cut Pro. And I had to figure out how to match up the audio from my iPhone from the video to my camera. So there's a lot of clapping, and and then there's lighting. It was disaster. The lowest budget. And that came through. If you look at the actual videos, they are bad. And then the second time around, I was like, wow, I was very successful. I hired a production studio. I rented a beautiful warehouse and we staged it with beautiful furniture. And it was like, wow, that never did nearly as well as my first course. And sometimes when like there's just this like complete giving yourself over to a project where it's like sink or swim, authentic, you really have no anticipation of like success. Therefore, you're really just being yourself, and sometimes that resonates with people. And you see that sometimes with like debut authors that after a long career in something, they come out with a book and it just strikes a chord. Like it strikes a chord, and there's something very authentic and raw and unpolished that people do or can resonate with. So I would encourage even people who can't write to save their own lives, but if they have something worth saying, especially if it's educational and it's business centric and it's niche. Look at Patrick, right? So we sold 10,000 copies of his book without trying. Really, we didn't do paid advertising for it. We didn't do much marketing for it. And 10,000 copies of a book is nothing to look down your nose at. And it's hyper niche. It's like it's advertising, it's digital advertising, it's specifically to Google and Facebook, and it's specifically about automation. It's a hyper niche book, but Patrick is a respected voice in that niche. And I'm not saying Patrick isn't a good writer. He happens to be a very good writer. But even if he wasn't a good writer, it would still be a valuable book because he knows something that people want to understand better. And still go for it. Don't worry that you can't write.
And P.S., if you're doing this process that Isaac's talking about, can I just recommend the book by, oh my gosh, I was going to say Patrick Fitzgerald, but now I'm totally blanking this. It's called Write Useful Books. Do you know this book?
No.
It is so good. It's the guy who wrote the Mom Test. And it's just like a guide to writing books that have a high usefulness per page density. And
that's interesting.
It's so good. He approached book writing like starting a software company, which he'd done in the past. And so he's like I love Steve Blank so much. We've had him on the show a couple of times. A lot of people know he, sold his last company for $8 billion and has taught at Stanford for 20 years. Great guy. But this author felt like it was not quite granular enough, and it was like totally follow you, but like it was just lacking some practical execution for him. And so then he did it himself, and he wrote like the absurdly practical guide for like introvert technical founders to be able to do customer validation on your product. And it's just like, it's so absurdly user-friendly and cut the fluff that it is sold like crazy. And he's like, to your point, he says like, my first edition came out with 200 typos. And he's saying like, but it had special use for information that other people didn't have. And it was just so useful, everybody passed it on. And his point is like, you can write a book, because most books are like a movie, they do really well at first and they drop off a slow death forever. And he's like, if you write a book and you test it all along the way, then by the time you're actually publishing it, you've had all of these ideal customers reading it and giving you the feedback, and you've edited it 100 times like making a product. By the time it comes out, it's useful because you got so many people that have already found it useful. That's the kind of thing that can sell more copies 10 years from now than the day it comes out. And it's like, they call them perennial sellers, where the sales just go up and up for years, right? I used to be a client at the AdVenture Institute, and then I actually went to work for them. They've got this book called Leadership and Self-Deception that's like that. No big fanfare, and it's past like 2 million copies now. And it's got to be like at least 15 years old, maybe like 18 years old. And every year it keeps outselling the previous year.
Yeah, and it's amazing.
It's just got this useful, it's Rob Fitzpatrick.
Yes.
And anyways, Write Useful Books is like, here's how I wrote the Mom Test. Here's how I wrote my book about presentation. Here's how you can write a book that will continue to sell and sell and sell. But the point is like, he is such a source. Like if he had a ghostwriter service, I would be signing up for him, because I can trust him, because he is taught in a way that I now understand his thinking and I agree with his thinking. So if he was available, like he would be that's who we would be going to,
Yeah.
He's just too rich and he doesn't have to do that. But
I would recommend 2 books that I really like if you're interested in learning about writing. Is Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield. Very short book, but impactful and inspirational. And Tell It Like It Is, a guide to clear and honest writing by Roy Peter Clark.
Oh, I don't know
Those are
that one. I'm
two.
going to get that one.
Yeah, those are 2 really good ones.
I mean, I love everything Stephen Pressfield, but tell me about the second one.
So he's written a bunch of Roy Peter Clark has written a bunch of books for authors. I think his one of like his perennial bestseller was called Writing Tools, and it's a great book. I give it out to everybody who starts here. He also has a book called How to Write Short, X-Ray Reading, and this one, Tell It Like It Is, which is really talking about clarity, honest writing. And what I like about him is he gives very practical examples. So it's not just theoretical. He'll pull examples from literature that you know. He'll say, this is the difference between the passive and the active voice, right? Like, here's how to avoid too many adverbs. He gives examples, and then he gives you like 3 or 4 exercises for you to do on your own to make sure you understand sort of what he's talking about. And yeah, just a good, easy read that is practical.
You know what I love about this advice, why I'm so nerdy about it, is like, I love that your marketing department is a profit center, not a cost center for you guys. You know, it reminds me of Joe Polizzi, the guy that wrote the content marketing, invented the Content Marketing Institute, his book, Killing Marketing, where he's just like, he's going through Red Bull Media House, how like their marketing engine makes them money, not costs them money. And just goes through all these folks who have done this, right? And like, but your advice applies whether you're a brand new startup without 2 nickels to rub together, or whether you're giant CEOs. You know, like we had Samara Cohen on the show. She manages $6 trillion at BlackRock with a T. And she started a YouTube series, and she just interviewed the CFO of McLaren supercars, and and she's doing David Rubenstein. The guy Carlyle manages $376 billion. And
it's wild. Yeah.
He started an interview show interviewing high profile people. Well, guess what? He is not learning the lighting. He's not learning the editing, right? Because he's got more money than time. And so they just start at that level. And yet, brand new person who could come off I just crashed a business last month, and I've done crying in my milk, and I'm ready to start again, right? They can do everything that you did starting from scratch, that I did with my podcast starting from scratch. Like, I love that it applies to the entire spectrum, and it does require the long-term thinking. But man, if you can endure, I mean, look at a good marriage, look at good parenting. Like, if you can endure, like, you can't compare the end result to any short-term option, right?
Yeah. I forgot who I heard say this recently. People tend to drastically overestimate what they could accomplish in 10 weeks and drastically underestimate what they could accomplish in 10 years. Or maybe it was 10 months and 10 years, but it's so true. It's so true. And what's unfortunate is most people realize that after 10 years, right? Like, and you will look back and you say, if I had that energy, if I recognize that long-term, and it takes a certain encouragement and personality, but you could, like, sort of along the lines of James Clear, Atomic Habits, you could see a microcosm of that, of a decade play out over the course of 10 days. Because if I say I'm going to start drinking 16 ounces of water right when I wake up in the morning for the next 10 days, you'll see how much better you feel, and you'll see how easier it became. And then if you're a thinking person, you could extrapolate that out to much larger manifestations of the same small behaviors over the course of a decade. So,
well, look at this. I mean, isn't this episode a perfect example? You start off telling us about failing at your art business. By the way, in all of our previous conversations, I don't think I ever told you, like, previous to getting into investment banking, I'm an art school dropout. Like, my plan was to do an MFA in painting at the Art Institute in Chicago.
That's amazing.
Like, I still paint today, but maybe we will have a follow-up, and sometime we can talk about like the CEO advantage of having a background in creativity.
Love it.
Because designing a business instead of just building it, right? But
love it.
I look at this. You just told us about basically how much your painting business sucks. You're frustrated, and you're in a 500 square foot apartment with no experience and no equipment, and now having managed hundreds of millions of dollars of ads for Sports Illustrated and Corning and NASDAQ and all these giant clients you've been with. Like, isn't that like an exact example of your 10 months, 10 years thing?
Totally. It's a very good example. And hearing you say it is like, sounds crazy to me. And I often like, I tell this to my wife a lot, like where she's anxious about this or that. And like, I say like, sometimes I'm just sitting in the shower and I just like feel like, how the hell did I get here? In a good way. Of course, there are days that are incredibly stressful and you've lost big accounts and, you have to try to manage the business and grow the business. And there's a lot of stress, but like I try to keep my orientation like fundamentally positive and appreciative and be like, this is better than we could have ever expected things to turn out, like all things considered. And I think some people would say, well, if you think that too much, you're going to lose your drive. But I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I think that optimism, that positive outlook, that it's not a voodoo, nebulous WeWork type manifestation. It's not that. It's not like we're going to manifest good. And we're going to like, close our eyes and take 5 deep breaths. And then the next decade will be, we'll be in good shape. It's just just feeling very confident in your own abilities and very optimistic about that everything will turn out in the best possible way. And it's at the same time putting in the maximum amount of effort over a long period of time. And I tell people like who either employees or people who come and ask for like, some career advice or I say like, you're going to have bad days and bad weeks like I do and everyone does and like Jess does. And like what I think helped me a lot was not trying to fight the bad days. They were like, I could tell there were months, like full months where like I could not be productive whatsoever. I could not do anything. But I got out of bed and I came to the office and I stared at my computer screen. I just went through the motions. Like I was optimistic enough that I conducted myself with the belief that this wouldn't last forever. And I think that's a big tipping point between people who shut down and spiral downwards and people who could just stay depressed for a while. And I'm not talking about like real significant mental health issues. I'm not diagnosing anybody, but we all go through periods of depression and feeling anxious and down and just like burnt out. But to me, showing up, going through the motions, and just even if I'm just staring at my computer screen playing chess or shopping on Amazon or I shouldn't even say this, but like I've had weeks where like I pretended I was on meetings and I was just watching Netflix in a phone booth at the office because I was so burnt out. I was like so burnt out. But like the motions, like getting out of bed, getting to the office, sitting in front of the computer, putting on a shirt, getting dressed, like those are important, like meaningful routines. And that's all part of consistency. Consistency doesn't mean like really being consistently, let's say, consistently operating at 100%. That's like no one's like that. Like maybe there's a handful of people in the world who are like that. That's not what I mean by consistency. Consistency is, I guess, how would you say it then? It's, yeah.
Can I jump in?
Say it. Yeah.
Because I know you love Stephen Pressfield too. Like, his book, The War of Art.
I love that book.
Like, as you're talking, I'm just like hearing the Stephen Pressfield book, right? Okay. Yeah. There we are. And he's saying like, I get up, I say my prayer to the muses. That's what he prays to, right? I sit down, I write for my X amount of time. And then, in his case, he like takes an extra copy and stashes it at like the saved digital copy in the glove box of his car in case there's a fire and he has to run out. Okay. But he's like, I save it to my computer, I save an extra copy and take it out to my car so that no matter what, I've got a backup. And he says, is it any good? I don't care. What I care is, did I show up? Did I do my work?
Exactly.
And he talks about, famous author Somerset Maugham, where somebody said, do you write only when inspired or do you write consistently? And he says, I only write when inspired. Luckily, inspiration strikes every morning at 9 a.m.
I love that. That's one of my favorite lines. Right? Yeah. If you listen to almost every successful author, none of them talk about this like creativity striking, like sexy type of experience where they're like, oh, they had to pull over because they had the brilliant stroke of genius. They're all consistent. They work, they keep regular hours. Like it's a very common theme.
But look at it in pro sports. I mean, those athletes who can sink every three, listen to how offended they get when some reporter says, oh, it's so amazing you were born with this skill. And they're like, excuse me?
Right.
How dare you discount the thousands of hours I spent in the gym to be able to do this? This wasn't handed to me. I earned every penny of this. Don't you dare call me a natural. I bled for this, right?
Totally.
Okay, listen, if people want to take the courses, where do they go? If they want to hire you guys to increase their ROAS, where do they go? If they want to follow you on social, where do they go?
You could check us out online at adventureppc.com. I'm on Twitter at Isaac Rudansky. If you want to check out the courses, they're sort of hosted on a bunch of different platforms. You could head over to Udemy, udemy.com. If you want to check out our DOLA, Day of Learning and Happiness, which we ran last November in New York City, it was a live event with 300 attendees, and all of the senior members of our team gave relevant lectures. You can go to adventureppc.com, and there's a link to access DOLA recordings and stream them on any device on the homepage. But yeah, like I'm just Isaac Rudansky into Google, and you'll probably get whatever links you're looking for.
Great. Okay, to close us off, what's one of the best pieces of advice you ever received? Or what advice would you go back and give a younger version of yourself?
I think one of the best pieces of advice I've ever received or heard was to never forget the people who helped you along the way to where you are. And the reason why I think that advice meant a lot to me was because implicit in that is that there were people that helped you, right? It's not just an exhortation to show appreciation. It's an implicit statement that no one makes anything of themselves alone. And I think a lot of times in society, we lose that, especially in marketing, because it's like the coolest thing to highlight. What do we call it? Self-made. Forbes annual list of self-made billionaires. So I find that to be a disingenuous concept, because I don't think there's any such thing. And I know they're contrasting it with inheritors and whatever, but fine. So never to forget the people, and so I think it's a humbling idea, but it's also an idea that like you're just be helpful to other people. And if I can go back in time and give myself some advice, probably to be more confident. Like, just like less insecure, more confident, that your goal in life doesn't have to be everybody's friend, right? Like I think I have a very high need for affiliation. And actually, if you look at the social psychology, typically CEOs have a low need for affiliation. They have a high need for achievement and a low need for affiliation. I think I have probably a moderately high need for achievement, but I have a very high need for affiliation. And if I were to go back in time, I would tell myself, look, it's okay. You don't have, people could disagree with you, and you could disagree, and you could be clear and confident and forthright in how you see things, and you'll be respected more for it. That would probably be, I would say that's like one of my personal failings, especially over the earlier years of getting started. And even now today, I think I struggle with that.
Well, that's great. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for making time to do this.
And I think there's a lot of different things that we connect on, and hopefully the audience appreciates the conversation.